welcome back to our longtime viewers. This is episode 1 of our Plants to Plants 2024 season. This will be a brand new version of our video series where we are introducing and interviewing people from across the cannabis processing space. We're very excited this week to be joined by Ryan Hoitt of Vape-Jet, one of the leading purveyors of automatic filling systems for cannabis oils, both in terms of vape cartridges as well as a increasingly broad spectrum of other packaging options. So Ryan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Emmett, for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Absolutely. We're thrilled to have you on. I've been really excited to talk to you since we're sort of both locals in the Oregon cannabis scene, long time pushing the technology forward. To start stuff off, why don't we just give a brief introduction as to, who you are, who Vape-Jet is, and, how did you come into the space and what's the journey been like from when you started to where you are today?
Yeah, so I started Vape-Jet back in, really started, brainstorming it 2018, but really got started with it 2019. That's when the first prototype and everything were created. But, I was doing various consulting work in technology in the cannabis industry for a long time, almost 10 years. No, over 10 years now. Wow. Time flies. It's crazy to think about. But, I cutting a long story short, I was in a lab and I saw just a bunch of people sitting around a table, and they were all sitting there with, syringes and filling vape carts with these syringes, and, everyone like rubbing their arms and everything. And I was just like, it just seems really inefficient. And, I did a little research and kind of saw what options were available on the market. And I just wasn't super, impressed with the placement of other things on the market, whether it be pricing or features or just some combination thereof. And I saw an opportunity, and I started building. And that was in, like I said, late 2018, 2019, I was prototyping it. Those first machines were, my co-founder Brian likes to retell the story often. My enclosure was made out of balsa wood because it's what I had in the garage. This was not, it was very much, built by hand with what was available, just to proof of concept it out. And then from there we iterated, built the 2.0 version of that. And to jump back, what really captured everyone's attention in the prototype was, the key thing that caught everyone's eye and why we were a success in the beginning was because we solved the issue of pre-placing all the cartridges into jigs. When the cartridges get shipped over from China, they all come from China one way or another. That's where all the factories and the supply chain is. When they come over in boxes, they come in these foams and they're arranged in packs. And foams are not dimensionally accurate. So it's not like you could just take that and set it on a machine, hit go, and, come back to a bunch of filled cartridges. Even the automated systems, you had to take every single one out and place it into a jig and then load that jig into the machine. And I have a little bit of, I have a really diverse background. And one of the projects that I worked on back in the day was another cannabis machine vision company that I founded. And I just was like, well, I can solve this with a camera. So we put a camera on it, and we, rather than, fixed indexing of XYZ coordinates and everything, wrote some software with machine vision to figure all that out on the fly, and then started building the rest of the machine up around that core technology, rather than just finding some existing, setup out there. Like, rather than just grabbing an XY table off the shelf, we went to the drawing board and we're like, well, what is specific to this application? It's sticky. It's messy. No matter how well you try to prevent drips and things in the lab, as well as I do, every surface in a lab will get sticky eventually. You got to clean it. So we started, designing around, well, how do we build a linear axis that doesn't care if it's sticky. Rather than using bearings that might get gummed up, use wheels with tensioners and things that will survive and be specific to cannabis and the unique properties thereof. Same thing on the pumping system. What's the best solution we can think of to pump this oil? Not, hey, what type of pump works best? No, what are the unique properties, and then design around that. So we really built the system from the ground up around the application, really incorporating the core machine vision technology. And that brought us to the 2.0 model. And that was, late 2019. Up to that point in the business, we total external funding to get everything off the ground was about $80,000, which for hardware prototypes and software and everything else was, this was really bootstrapped. So we got that 2.0 model out there, and I built a few of them. One is still, one's still cranking out cartridges to this day, but only built 8 of them. And the reason being was I identified kind of late 2019 the fact that if I had to fly out, or if I had to hire a technician to fly out and install every one of these machines, I was always going to be limited by my install schedule. And this is a device where we could meet a much higher market demand if we were just able to do everything remotely. So I went to my CFO. I about gave him a heart attack because I was like, I'm stopping sales. I'm stopping sales. I'm stopping marketing. I'm not going to sell anymore. I'm accumulating tech debt. I don't want to accumulate tech debt. I want to redesign it. So me and my technical co-founder, Devin, went back to the drawing board for just about 45 days. And we locked ourselves. We put ourselves in the office and ordered a lot of takeout and a lot of late nights, and didn't focus on sales. We supported the existing machines we had, but we didn't focus on sales or manufacturing or anything else. And we spent 45 days designing it with redesigning it from the ground up again with everything that we learned. And that's when we launched 3.0 in early 2020. And as we all know, what happened to the world in early 2020, everything was forced to go remote. So the fact that we had just redesigned the system. One of the big issues with the 2.0 version of Vape-Jet is every time you swap between like a half-gram cartridge and a full-gram cartridge, you had to make a mechanical, unloosen some bolts, move the platform up into position, bolt it back down to account for the different height differences. That wasn't something we were going to ask our customers to do in the field. That's more of a factory calibration type thing. So for 4.0, we just added a 4th axis. Like, okay, so we'll, do that in the field and calibrate it in the field remotely. And all those things kind of culminated. And then since the world was forced to go all remote in early 2020, we were well positioned to be able to, satisfy that demand. And we really, really took off in 2020. 263% growth from the year before, and that's continued sustained over 100% year over year since then. And it's not like we just stopped at 3.0. We had a major software upgrade in early 2022 that rolled out to all the Vape-Jet 3.0 units that had been sold to date, and it actually increased their throughput just through software by 30%. And the reason why we wrote that software for Vape-Jet 4.0. But because we did it all in-house and we built off the existing platforms we already had, we were able to take all those software improvements that were written for 4.0 and figure out how to apply them to the 3.0 fleet. So while Vape-Jet 4.0 is still going to be faster than a 3.0, all those software upgrades to the new products now are filtering down to even the older products through software updates. And it's really cool to be able to, go to a 2-year-old machine and be like, hey, I got you another 5% this week. It's a really good and fun conversation to have with people. So it turned out to be a really good call to design with that IoT style infrastructure really at the core of the machine.
Amazing.
And
yeah, what a journey.
And that brought us to today.
Yeah, that's great. And obviously, coming from a early prototype implementing a brand new camera vision approach to this space, and then iterating to the point where now you have extremely high efficiency, drops in, plug and play, and the client site self-adjusts, and you keep eking out more and more efficiency through software. That's exactly what the customers want to hear from a product like Vape-Jet. So what is the key differentiating technology that made Vape-Jet from the very start a better product for cartridge filling than other cartridge fillers on the market?
Well, really, like, we designed it with cannabis oil in mind from the ground up. But I would say that's like an incremental upgrade over the competition, because people have working solutions out there. They all have their, pros and cons. But what really was the key differentiator was that camera and machine vision system, which eliminated a major labor step. Even though it's an automated machine, if you have to, spend 2 to 3 minutes per tray transferring everything over, you're just shifting your labor from one place to another. So what really differentiated us from the competition was the ability to, get the box from UPS, dropping off the box, opening up the box, slicing it open, grabbing the tray, putting it directly on the machine, and not have that be pre-programmed in, have that be figured out on the fly by the system. And that was our real differentiator.
So a real adaptive system that allows you to just take pre-shipped trays of cartridges, drop them straight into the machine. It takes a look at what the tray orientation is, and it knows where each of those carts is, and it just fills. That's really amazing step forward in automation, and that, of course, is continued through all your iterations of the design. That said, I know that you have made some real improvements in terms of being able to just drop this system directly into a new facility and push the button and go. So what was that real step forward in your V3 and V4 versions that allowed this to be a much more plug-and-play system?
One of the major flaws that we found with the 2.0 design was it was too reliant upon external environmental factors. In other words, it needed a consistent lighting environment in the room it was placed in. It needed a consistent atmosphere around it, because there's heaters and things in there, but those are affected by the ambient temperature. So, very quickly, we controlled all those external factors by putting it in. We put it in a box, and then we climate controlled that box with a whole nother, PID loop and heater system and exhaust fans and all of that. So we control the lighting, we control the environment, and all of that feeds back into the software. So it doesn't, why is it plug and play? Because we control for all those environmental variables. Now, there's still, to this day, there's environmental variables that we can't control. We tell people, it's very important. Put the machine on a steady surface. It has, you're flinging carts around in there at high speeds, and if the entire table that it's sitting on is wiggling back and forth, it's going to have issues. But for the as much as we were able to, we controlled for those external factors. And I'll even say, when it comes to the wobbly table thing, we saw that pretty often. We were having to have that conversation. We're like, it needs, not the thinnest stainless steel table you can buy, and with the legs that do this. So we designed a cabinet for it to sit on. That's very sturdy cabinet. Again, controlling the external factors as much as possible, so that you can deploy your technology and reasonably expect it to behave in the way that you expect it to.
Trying to find better and better ways to control the environment in which the cartridge is being filled, and by doing so, getting consistent results and being able to increase the speed of filling. That's really amazing. What are the key environmental factors in a facility that really impact how efficiently a cartridge can be filled, and how have you controlled those in your Vape-Jet 4.0 system?
The major ones are temperature and lighting. And by putting it in an enclosure, controlling the internal lights, controlling the internal environment, we can control for that. Outside of that, oil consistency is the number one thing that we can pump the oil, but if it's super thick and due to processing requirements, you can't heat it up very far, you're going to have low throughput. If it's a really thin oil, we're going to have to cool everything down more and, perform more back off so that you maintain fluid lock. So really the oil viscosity and properties of that oil are the one thing we can't control for it. We can control for it as much as we can, but it is one of those external factors that is still, key to success in vape cart filling. To give you an example of we control for it as best as we can. One thing that we notice, and I do hope, through better SOPs and over time, this becomes less of an issue, but especially, beginning labs don't have their SOPs dialed in quite right. Their homogenization or their stirring won't be, it won't be homogeneous throughout the entire batch. So you'll get thicker pockets and thinner pockets. One way that we solve for that is by on our control motors, I'm going real far in the technicals here, but on any of the control motors, they're closed loop systems. So I have a syringe attached to a motor, right? And as that motor moves forward, if it stalls or if it doesn't move as fast as I told it to, my software knows that and can slow down that process. So when I say we will dispense accurately every time, even if the pump stalls, because we detect that stall. There's not a physical gear, but without jumping into pulse widths and everything else, we magically re-gear the motor on the fly electronically. We slow it down and we finish out the motion. So even if the system, encounters a pocket of oil that is much thicker than the others around it, it's going to account for that and adapt to that. And really that is key in automation, is making it adaptable. You can control for all these external factors, but you can't control for every single one. There's always process variability. One customer is going to, have distillate, another live resin, another rosin. Somebody's going to be doing this mix over here, that mix over there. And it's all, you can't control for that on the machine. Your machine has to be able to adapt to all those things. But in terms of controlling for external, as many different places, the pump is a great example, the heaters, there's 3 different heat zones in the system: a reservoir heater, the chamber heater, a needle heater, and then the entire enclosure is a heater, and all these things to control all those temperatures. Throwing as many closed loop feedback systems into the design as possible in order to adapt to those factors that you just can't control for.
You brought something up that is very difficult, but also important for processors to control for in their upstream processing and formulation of vape carts, and that's the viscosity of the oil. You mentioned that your system can adapt somewhat to a range of viscosities in the oil, but how important is it for consistent productivity for clients to have a standardized viscosity in their oil?
As with most things, you can shift areas of responsibility from one place to another. In other words, if you're not controlling for it in your upstream process, then you need to have someone on the downstream side to account for those things and be able to adapt to them. So where to control for that, that's a decision that has to be made. Obviously when we're looking at things from a business point of view, we want everything to be consistent and optimized and everything else, but we're working with a live plant. One batch is not going to be the same as the next batch. Control for it as best as you can through those SOPs. But if you're not controlling for it upstream, you need to be prepared to, account for it downstream. One way that on the Vape-Jet system, if you're going to have enormous variabilities in viscosity from batch to batch, then the person operating the machine needs to know to load a different profile when they get a batch that's really thick. Because in the Vape-Jet, you can on the fly change, like, hey, I'm running a low viscosity fluid, I'm running a medium viscosity, or I'm running, this exact batch because I calibrated the pump for it. Whatever level of detail you go in when you set up the system, some of our customers set up a fluid profile, which is like distillate. and they just set the settings so that it'll pump 99% of distillates and then don't think about it anymore. We have other clients that are, have 50 different fluid profiles because every batch that comes in is variable for them, or maybe they're a co-packer and they don't know ahead of time and they don't have control over that. Co-packers usually don't have control over the viscosity. They have no control over what they're filling or the oil. So what they'll have hundreds of different configuration profiles and calibrate for each one. So that's, an example of controlling for that viscosity downstream. Whereas if you're an MSO and you have a standardized process everywhere, you're going to have one fluid profile loaded to the Vape-Jet and you're going to hit load. Or, 3 or 4, depending on what product you're filling that day. We can go over that later.
Sure. Well, actually, no, you bring up a great point because, in our designs, we're always thinking about how we can give the clients the flexibility, especially in automated environments, to create their own custom, say, recipe of set points for a given system, be it extraction or downstream processing like cartridge filling, and be able to have that be replicable but adaptable. So can you talk me through a little bit about what it takes to calibrate one of these pump curves? Are you taking oil into the system and having it make some sort of measurements, or do you take measurements at the bench? What's it look like to create a pump curve to get a really consistent cartridge fill for a specific kind of oil?
All right. So to answer your question, I pulled open the GUI of our test machine. Nobody was getting serial number 420. That was my machine. I held on to 420. So this is my test machine here. And somebody is using it. They shouldn't be. But one thing about the Vape-Jet systems, this machine is nowhere near me. I'm operating this remotely. But to answer your question, so how do you calibrate the pump? One of the things that I really enjoyed about writing the software for this was having live SOPs. Rather than having an SOP live on the website somewhere, no, it lives right on the machine. And every time we find a gap in our SOP, a customer is going to tell us right away because we're deploying this to hundreds of people at once. So if there's an error, we're going to hear about it and we're going to be able to fix it and push that out, fleet wide. So this is the pump calibration wizard. And the way that you calibrate for it is you initially tell it how much you want to dispense. So let's say we were going to go with a 1 gram dispense. You're just going to drag this slider out to 1 gram. Now, something I say in my demos to people all the time, and it's kind of an interesting tidbit, is I'm lying to you right now. The software is lying to you. This isn't in grams. This is in milliliters. But you'll see why I made it this way, mostly due to education around everything. It's accounted for later, but interesting tidbit. In reality, you're setting 1 milliliter here, and you'll see why that distinction is important in a second.
Can you walk us through what it takes to calibrate one of the Vape-Jet systems, and how do you get a custom profile for filling a specific kind of oil into carts efficiently?
So for fluid specifically, all the calibrations of the Vape-Jet system are done through these calibration wizards, and all these SOPs are built into the interface of the machine. What you're seeing right now is a 1-for-1 exact replica of what's on the touch screen at the very front of the machine. So the operator would come over here to calibration, pump, and then it tells them what they need. We hit next. And this is where, let's say you were setting up a profile for a 0.5 gram cartridge, right? What you're going to do is you're going to drag this slider out to a 0.5 gram. Okay. One interesting tidbit of information is, even though this says grams, it's technically in milliliters. It's a volumetric pump, but we account for that later, and you'll see why. Originally, when I wrote the software, I did have this in milliliters, but it was causing too much confusion, and we just renamed it because it doesn't matter. And you'll see why it doesn't matter in the next step. So here is where the operator is going to observe how the fluid moves through the system and then make some slight adjustments. So for example, how fast you're charging the pump, how fast you're dispensing out of the pump, how long to wait after charging the pump. Do we wait before it starts pushing forward? Because with fluids, you always have equalization times and a million other factors. So what you'll do is you'll observe, how the fluid is pulling into the pump and pushing out. One thing, you can't really see it too well. Let me see if I can get a better view. There's a big plexiglass window right here that looks directly at the syringe, and there's a light that shines through it. So it's really easy to see. And the reason why is because on the screen, you're going, okay, I can charge it a little bit faster, or I can push it a little bit faster, depending on the viscosity. If you're just running regular old distillate and you're heating it up to like 70 C, and it has like a 3 to 4% terpene content, you're going to take the slider and, it's going to be 1 or 2. A lot of times for your lives, you'll be out here, but this will adjust depending on the viscosity. Once you have that dialed in, now you're going to tell it exactly how much you want it to dispense. 0.505, a very slight overway. Then, if you can see in this camera feed right here, this is actually a glass beaker that rides around with the tray. So the system being over that beaker, they'll hit cycle pump, and then they'll take that to their lab scale. They'll tear out the beaker first, take it to the lab scale, and type in, it actually dispensed 0.512. Now, remember in step 2 where I was like, no, that's really in milliliters. Well, I have milliliters, and then I have exactly how much was dispensed. So I have enough information from there to calibrate the pump. So it is exactly 5.05. And then on this, one second, let me get back to that second screen there. Let's say the user was to set their speeds too high or something like that. That's where that adaptive pump motor starts to kick into play. Even if you set this wrong, it's still going to adapt. It's just not going to perform as well as it could. And it will start giving you an error message and be like, hey, I'm having to adjust your pump too often. You should probably, decrease the speed slightly. It'll give you a pop-up telling you that as you're running.
Gotcha. So the system is actually giving you feedback about what it's experiencing, probably in terms of the torque on the motor, to be able to tell you, oh, I think this is dispensing too much, or I'm having to reset this pump too frequently. So you need to pull back the speed at which you're dispensing each cartridge.
Right.
That's great. Yeah, so it's really a push and pull between the user preferences and the system giving them feedback about real-time information about how the fills are going. That's an incredible value, especially when a lot of previous systems would have had a manual mechanical adjustment for each one of these variables, or having to go into some sort of obscure software around the VFD or other interface to change how your motor was behaving. So doing this all in an automated fashion, in a user-friendly, web UI, or on board the actual system in the GUI interface there on the touchscreen. Huge push forward in usability and adaptability of the system. So, gotta really commend you for all the work you put into that.
Thank you, and I really do want to point out, like, the interface is only where it's at due to the feedback loop with the customers that we have, because, I'm going to write, I write the SOP, we go in there, step 1 is this. We have really great customers who, the moment they're like, hey, you said this over here, but and the thing I love about the system is, okay, we go in there, we change the wording a little bit, we, provide the update. We don't force updates. We don't do auto updates. Updates are opt-in. It's a piece of, automation equipment. You don't want to, again, controlling for variables. But if you do opt into those updates, or let's say you update once a year or something, you're getting that collective feedback from all of our different customers who have just helped us refine the system to where it is.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, just having active conversations with your clients instead of just frustration and no access to give feedback is huge. And of course, you said you had, as much as 30% gains in the speed of filling over time just in software. So to have that kind of benefit of opting into these updates really motivates people to be engaged. So yeah.
I will say we didn't have anybody who refused that update.
I bet. Yeah. So talking about the feedback that you're seeing from your customers, I can't help but wonder what kind of information you're getting about what kind of form factors or product types you're actually seeing most out there in the market. I'm sure this depends on the region, but have you seen major changes in the last few years as to what people are filling?
We're definitely able to see trends in the type of devices and the products that are being filled over time. One great example that I like to give is, a couple of years ago, I was looking, at data and sitting there trying to figure out what to make of it all. And I saw that there was one specific product category that had about a 5%, market share across the fleet. And then the next month it was almost 9%. And I was like, that's pretty big growth. And then the month after that, I'm looking at low 20s. And then over the next 6 months, it actually, at the time, don't quote me on this day to day, it's been a while since I looked at this particular instance, but it was in the evolution of the disposable devices over the 510s. We saw that month over month growth. We started seeing so many more customers start to switch over to all-in-one. I know everyone likes the term all-in-one. If you ask me, it's a little bit of dressing on it's disposable. I won't get into all that, but I will quick shout out. People, stop throwing away lithium, please. But we did see the market start to shift away from those 510 parts to those disposables through the data, just straight up looking at it going, hey, this may only be 5% this month, but it was 9% the next month. That's huge. Being able to see that in advance was really helpful, because that month that I saw it go from 5 to 9%, I immediately went to the team, was like, all right, double down development. We have to figure out how to accommodate these things. On a personal level, I wish the industry would standardize around some sort of pod system or something where we're not throwing away rechargeable batteries. But, as a company that has to build devices, which fill devices to fill consumer demand, I was able to see that growth and really redeploy our internal resources to be able to best meet that demand. So as, more and more devices came on the market, we were already a little bit ahead of that in being able to accommodate for the different sorts of foam factors that were coming out.
Right. So all-in-one device is obviously a big change in terms of what the actual tank would look like that you have to fill. But because you're using this computer vision system and, you have adaptation in software that controls the system, you're actually able to pretty readily accept new types of tanks. Now, let me ask, in the beginning, was the system good enough that it was just able to adapt to fill those from the start, and then you just started looking into optimization, or did you have to recode the system to be able to recognize these types of tanks? What did that look like?
It was a constant iterative process. It was get it, working really well with standard 510s. And then it was somebody would submit a compatibility. We have a compatibility request program that you go to our website, you fill out a form, you ship in the hardware, and we get to work. And we have an outstanding success rate with it. But no, everything, so many curveballs. A great example was the first time I saw a foam with offset rows and columns. Like, it didn't make much sense, but that's how it came from the manufacturer. There were, gaps, and everything was offset from one another. And our system originally was designed to look for a grid, because everything was laid out in a grid. It was a 5x10 grid, not a grid of 5 on this line and 4 on this line and 5 on this line and 4 on, and you see all these things come out, and we'd see them and look at it and go, oh yeah, it's not going to work for that, but we'll make it work for that. And we wrote, our grid calculation function in our software started out as, you gave it point A, point B, and it projected a virtual grid of points based off of how many in the X and how many in the Y. And then, we saw the problem of people were loading the foams into the machine sideways. So we got on the phone and we told people, stop loading your foam in sideways. Line it up, please. At the same time, we worked on software, which, okay, so now we take the first and last, and we also take an image from, one of the other corners, and we updated our grid projection to account for tilt and skew. Mm-hmm. And then we added like the offset rows and columns, and then we added the ability to have extra rows at the top or the bottom, or missing the sides, or all these different things. And one great one was we had a request from a customer who, this was 2021, and their hardware had pretty badly bent center posts. Now they could correct for that, afterwards as they were capping it, they could, bend it back into position and cap for it. But what they found was if it was bent beyond a certain angle, it usually meant the electrical connection got lost and it was going to be a misfire and a return anyway. So they asked us, is there any way to account, measure that tilt? No, but we'll figure it out. So what we started doing was measuring the center post in relation to the outer wall of the cartridge. And if it's offset too much, you can just configure the software to skip that one. Why waste your oil in a piece of hardware that is going to be a failure to begin with?
And that alone, I think, is a huge benefit for folks, automatically identifying failures and preventing a return. What we hear from people all the time is that returns are the number one cost of this, cartridge-based business. So, huge value in being able to anticipate which cartridges might fail ahead of time. Really big. What type of oil do you think is currently gaining in the market for cartridges? And do you see that continuing moving forward, or do you think that it will reach a new balance and things will stay the same?
We definitely see a big shift towards live resin and rosin carts as well. A little bit more processing involved, especially on the rosin side of things. Like it's a very labor intensive process and low yielding, but we do see growth there. Live resins, live products in general, not taking your oil all the way down to distillate. That's the trend, because people want the flavor. They want the wholeness of everything in their cart, and distillate carts are still, they still are the number one selling thing out there. They're still what the consumer is demanding, but we do see the live resin market really, really, really picking up and really doing well, especially in the established states. You're seeing the distillate carts do really well in new markets. People are finding out the brands they like. They're discovering the product. But over time, what we do see, the Californias, the Oregons, the Washingtons, the Colorados definitely see more of a focus on craft and live and not taking stuff all the way down to distillate.
Right, and so two forces on there, impacting that demand is, one is, of course, informed consumers that know the difference in the flavor profile and the effect between a distillate and a live resin, or a live rosin even. But then on the other side, getting an established processing base that can really scale up the manufacturing of those products to the point where it makes sense to put them into a cartridge. And, you're moving more volume that way than just moving it as a dabbable. A question that, many people ask me, especially on the consumer side, but also in the business and when they're just getting in, is that, they see this live resin cartridge. Is that THC-A? Or is that a decarboxylated oil? Are you able to dispense a THC-A heavy oil product, or is that too viscous? What can you tell me about that?
Without going into too many details around formulation, because I'd really like to pull in Devin my CSO. He's the guy who answers all these questions for me, so I don't misspeak. But I will say, I know enough about. Yes, we're able to fill a certain percentage of THC-A. After a certain point with THC-A, you have crashing issues. It's just not going to work in the cart itself. There is a point. There is a point where you can get away with some THC-A, but it does need to be partially decarboxylated.
That makes perfect sense. And then,
like, that's a limitation of the machine as well as the current hardware. Like, if you were to crash out inside your hardware, you're going to have to sit there with a blow dryer just to get it going again.
Right. Yeah, there aren't really optimized cartridges for a THC-A heavy oil yet, at least not mass deployed.
Right. I saw some really interesting things at BizCon this year, so we'll see how those take off.
Absolutely. And to that point, I did want to take a minute to shout out an up and coming product, maybe a sneak peek here. You do have a method of dispensing high THC-A type of products, don't you? What can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So we've been working on it a while. It's taking some time to dial in, but we do have our Dab Dispenser. It's the Vape-Jet Dab Dispenser. It's no big secret. It's just still kind of limited release. It's mostly for our existing customers and people we've been working with really closely while we go through that iterative learning process. So, people that we've had a good working relationship, we have quite a few out there in their hands, and we're just about ready to release it, to a wider audience. But we did find having that quick close feedback loop design process with our customers that we already have great relationships with really helped refine this product. And yeah, it dispenses dabs. It's right there in the name. It moves very thick products. It can move crystals up to a certain diameter. You're not going to push through giant rocks through this thing, but you can get things up to a certain diameter through it. And it's much more complicated fluid dynamics and pumping wise than the Vape-Jet system, but it's also a lot easier, or simpler, I should say, because you're just kind of brute forcing paste out of an extruder. Now, one problem with that in the development process is a lot of inconsistencies, voids in products. When you're working with something that isn't homogeneous, that isn't really a fluid, it's also has pockets and diamonds and air things here and some terp streak here, and it's not really well homogenized at this point. One issue is, how do you accurately dispense that by weight, especially when we're regulated by dispensing by weight or volume, take your pick. So we designed the pump itself to be closed loop. It's connected right. Where's the Vape-Jet? I was saying you took the container out, you placed it on the scale, and you typed in what it was dispensing. With our Dab Dispenser, the scale is just built into the system, and it's constantly auto-calibrating. Every single time it dispenses, it goes, hey, I didn't dispense quite enough. Let me do a top off, and then I'm going to internally recalibrate my, steps per milliliter. I'm going to recalibrate that on the fly, and the next time I'm going to nail it. So that closed feedback loop, it dispenses dabs right into the jar. And it's also no secret. I mean, once you have all that set up, it's a pretty obvious next evolution. And this is why we were waiting to release it to a wider audience, is why not just get rid of the part where the operator puts the jar on the scale and just move the jar to the scale automatically. So
right. Moving closer and closer to a food style packing line where the packaging is automatically conveyed to the dispenser. Dispenser is self-calibrating, and you're getting the same pack time and time again. A huge savings. We're all looking forward to the point where this sort of small enterprise scale system is available, and one day we hope it might even integrate with some sort of packing system for the final packaging as well, because we know in a lot of places they have certain requirements for that packaging, and that is a lot of labor for those just getting into the business. I think this is one of the biggest blind spots, be it cartridges or dabbables. Either way, just getting it into the cardboard pack, getting it into the zipper pouch, getting into whatever that final form factor is to be able to go onto the shelf. That can be hundreds, thousands of man hours a year, and a lot of businesses, especially processors, they don't want to be in the business of having a packing warehouse, right? So they're having to outsource it, or they're having to find a contractor to come in and do it for them periodically. Very expensive. So even just this step of automating the dispensing, we're talking about multiples of time savings versus the alternative of manually scooping little by little the appropriate amount into a container. I mean, it's painstaking, it's painful, and it's time consuming. So those are all labor costs, huge labor costs that you could save by this type of automation.
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
exciting.
And you touched on automation in general. People ask me, well, what's next? And I usually tell them, I don't know. Once I'm done with this one, I'm going to go walk around the lab again and see where the most people are standing around, which likely is going to be folding boxes. Don't know yet,
right.
But if you want to look at what to automate, just go walk through your business. Walk through and see what monotonous tasks. Look for the low-hanging fruit. Start there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that sort of mentality of find the pain point, what's taking the most time, can you find a way to reduce that time to accomplish that goal? Filling cartridges was an obvious first one. Just a little history lesson here. We used to be having basically a manual heated tank, and then you're trying to find a syringe or something else that could get from that tank into the cartridge, manually holding the cartridge, getting it on there. Hopefully you have some sort of dispenser that maybe has calibration. Back in the day, probably not. You were filling it, weighing it, topping it up, weighing it again. So going from there a few years ago to now, automatically calibrated, consistent, self-monitoring, remote monitoring, remote support type of automation for this task. And I should emphasize, at a scale that's appropriate for these businesses, because there are other types of fillers that have been out on the market for a long time coming from other industries, but they're so large, so expensive, and just sort of overbuilt for the use that they really haven't been accessible except for the very largest businesses. And even they may hesitate to get something that's probably a little bit overbuilt for their purposes. But this is right sizing the automation and still implementing those really important critical features of calibration and reliability and support that you absolutely have to have in this business because it is high value. So that sort of mentality, applying it to other spaces, that's where the opportunity is. To those customers that think of themselves as, we're a new business, we're in a new state that's just coming online. We just want to do things old school. We don't really want to spend money on automation. I look at the price tag of this, it seems really high. What's your pitch to them to say, no, you should really be looking at automation from day one, and this will make or break your business?
Yeah. So just it's pretty easy to sit down with a spreadsheet and be like, hey, this is ROI positive over this amount of time. Look at your business plan. Look at how many people are going to be sitting around filling cartridges. Put a dollar value to that. Be realistic with yourself. Then put a dollar value to the automation equipment. Do this everywhere. Don't just do this for cart filling. Do this in all aspects of your business. Sit down and figure out what your actual costs are. See if there's an automation solution, and then see what the cost of that is. Compare those two things. Figure out what your number is. Is your number a year? Is your number 2 years? Is your number 5 years? Is your number 6 months? I don't know your number, but figure out your number, and these decisions become plainly obvious to you if you just write them down and look at them objectively. And the one thing that I will point out about that is that number is crashing so fast. And by that, what I mean is you were talking about right sizing for the industry. The technology that's available in the system was not possible 5, 10 years ago. The things that we're able to do with the components at the price level that are available to us is amazing. I'd point out, I think a big part of it was the 3D printing revolution, especially in the automation industry. The 3D printing revolution revolutionized and still is, the automation industry, because those same devices, yes, they're used, the same control systems, stepper motors, heaters, all those sort of things, they're used in 3D printers. They've been used in large scale industrial automation for a very long time, but you had to buy a very expensive PLC to integrate with them, and the economies of scale weren't there. Now that your home consumers are buying these devices with all this advanced technology in it, that motor, which may have cost me $300 5 years ago, is now like $20-$30, because the economies of scale that were unlocked through the 3D printing revolution. And where that really, really, really starts to show, in my opinion, is and yes, I will stand by this. I know even people in this call will probably disagree. The long-awaited death of PLCs and locked-in industrial automation systems, because the technology is becoming accessible. There are libraries, there's open source platforms you can build upon that are absolutely just as reliable as the industrial automation systems, but they're not locked down. You're not having to pay for a Siemens engineer to come out to upgrade your screen firmware. You don't have to do that anymore. The technologies are really accessible, and what you're going to see is more and more companies like Sci-Fi, like Vape-Jet, like any of these companies. You're going to see a lot more entries of people right-sizing automation equipment to meet that number that I was talking about earlier. And that number is just going to keep going down and down and down.
So right now, would you say it's fair to say that for your product lines, for Vape-Jet 4.0, and eventually the Dab Dispenser as well, that you're talking typically ROIs that are less than 2 years, less than a year for most businesses at the scale where that size of cartridge filler is appropriate?
I like to aim for the year, for about a year. That tells me it's a good, that obviously if we can get it under a year, that's great. If it's too far under that, I have to look at, the business case. I'm like, is it priced too low for the purpose and everything? Is there something else we can add on? Is there something else we can, more do? But yes, 1 year is a good sales point, because 1 year is pretty easy, especially in the cannabis industry. Timelines are compressed. Every timeline has been compressed. Things go up, things go down. You have to adapt really quickly, more so than in like the food and beverage industry, where if your number may be 5 years. In cannabis, getting your number to below 2 is ideal. If you can get it below 1, it's kind of a slam dunk. But getting it below 2 is, I feel, a good place for this industry.
The key thing for us when we look at companies that have adopted automation versus companies that rely on the brute force of labor hours, the thing that gets people time and time again is labor shortage. I mean, this is a specialty business. There are people interested in coming into it, but overall experience is very hard to come by, especially since we're growing into new states year on year. So turnover is a big risk. You might have somebody that could fill a lot of cartridges very quickly and is highly skilled, but your chances of losing that person and then losing their expertise and falling behind on your production targets is always a high risk. And when you have a machine that has great support, that's fully automated and just requires a person to supervise it and to change out trays and can do something else at the same time, packaging probably, then you've greatly reduced your risk. So not only on year 2 are you actually saving money because you're no longer paying for a person, salary, but you've also dramatically reduced the chance of turnover and the costs of reskilling. Just a huge factor for a lot of companies, either makes the business or breaks the business.
I will say in Vape-Jet's case, and I hope a lot of other companies are, taking the same approach, especially as we have, this IoT type architecture. Like, our support technicians can log into the machine and help you remotely. They can see the same things you're seeing. They can see the reports and the temperatures and see how it's behaving and all those other things. That specialty expertise, we're not going to lose it here at Vape-Jet. We're supporting an entire fleet of these things. And with that IoT style support methodology, I guess you want to call it, I with that fleet management approach to things, we're able to give all of our customers that expertise on demand. You don't need that expert there every single day. You might need them once every 6 months, but we're there. And we're really good at supporting those things. And all that expertise is in-house. A really good example is on the formulation side of things. Is that upstream from our main responsibility? Yeah, it is. We have, my CSO just got done teaching a formulation class to all of our support technicians yesterday. He flies out time to time if somebody is, experiencing, clogging or bubbles or anything, and maybe somebody just has a new formulation and they're playing around with it. We'll get on a plane. We'll get out there. We'll be there. And those shared resources and that shared expertise and knowledge has really been a great ride. And I do think that, as before I was saying, that cost of the automation components and the accessibility of it is coming down. If you start layering on all these technologies on top, it's a really good business proposition, because like you said, that person may not be there 6 months from now, but we will be.
Absolutely. And, as we come to the end of our conversation, I know that you have another passion in the background, and it does have to do directly with sorting information and making it accessible to your team and to your clients. So what can you tell me about the way that AI has impacted your business, and what do you see its place moving forward? And I should say maybe, machine learning and, AI type systems.
Sure. I'll start with saying the thing I'm saying to everyone, which is start using these tools. Use them every single day. Use them as much as possible, please. They're not going anywhere. How they apply to Vape-Jet and how we've implemented them at Vape-Jet, I can just take you, through one of our current systems is called VapeGPT. And what VapeGPT is it's a Slack user. So it's a Slack bot. It's just a user in Slack. You can @VapeGPT, and it has access to all of our Jira tickets, all of our support history. It has access to our HubSpot notes. So one really good example is if a customer is having an issue and they want a quick history of the machine, I don't have to go into Jira and search for their serial number. I go @VapeGPT, give me a service history of VJ420. It's going to read all those tickets and it's going to spit me out a summary of all the things. And it does an excellent job. We've fed all of our website copy, all of our internal documentation resources. We trained a custom system with that, and we use that for copywriting with our brand's tone. Product support. Inside the machine GUI today, if you open up a ticket and you say, my needle is broken, right? It's going to open a ticket on Jira. That's what we use for our ticketing system. It opens up the ticket. The AI system then goes and it downloads the machine logs, attaches them to the ticket. It goes through and it looks at the recent error history and all the changes to the machine. And it goes, hey, blah, blah, blah. And then it spits out, based off of our prior ticket histories that might be similar to that issue, the state of the machine, the state of the configurations, and it takes all that information in, and then it gives a suggestion. And honestly, at this point, we've made it to where it writes the response to our ticket for us. Now, I will say, I don't believe in tying that. I don't believe in getting rid of the human element in the customer support experience. It's not there yet. These systems are not ready for that. But that's an internal resource. I can tell you our support tech, when they go to open up the ticket, already having the full machine's history summarized, they don't have to read every detail. The machine did that. It just spit them out a quick little history. And especially if that history applies to the current issue somehow, it identifies and writes that out for us. So that's on the customer support side. And then the customer support tech can copy paste the response back to the customer and edit a few things because it may not be 100% accurate. It might spit out a hallucination. That's why the human is still in the loop. The one thing that I think people really need to understand with these AI systems is they're trying to get rid of the human in the loop way too early. It's not ready to get rid of the human in the loop. It is an assistant. And it is a very, very good assistant. It's not replacing us yet. It will. I'm very convinced it will, but it's not there yet. So we need to learn how to live alongside those tools. And that's something I really heavily emphasize to my team. You know, that's on the customer support side of things. For our sales side of things, hey, give me a quick, lead history for this person, and it'll read through all the HubSpot notes and, all the sales activities and see what and, hey, their kid had a soccer game on Thursday. You should mention, it's going to spit all those things out. And it's really good at digesting and regurgitating a large amount of information and summarizing and getting things to you. I will also say it's really good at copywriting and just general office admin tasks. Not good enough to replace the person, but to use as a tool.
Yeah, getting a start. Well, that's all amazing applications, how it's really benefiting your the performance of your business to implement AI, machine learning, and LLM type technology. I have a specific question, which is, do you think that your systems, say, 2 years out, 5 years out even, that they will have a predictive prompt to the user saying, hey, I noticed that this is happening with your system. Maybe this issue is on the horizon. You should take preventative action. Is that going to be happening soon?
Absolutely. Without any, I would bet on it. I would heavily bet on it. I'd take I take whatever odds you want to put on that one. That yes, we will, because that's the direction the technology is moving.
It's amazing to see that again at an appropriate scale, coming closer and closer to us, because we've seen these things in large factory settings. People may not know this, but they have technology, even have microphones in factories to listen to the motors, to detect variations in what the motors sound like, to predict which motors need to be replaced when. There's a whole set of this that started way before AI and machine learning really became into the public mind. But now, because it has, and we've taken so many steps forward in the adaptability and applicability of these systems, it's becoming accessible to small businesses and to small business users. And for that reason, there's so much potential just ahead of us that'll really help. I think troubleshooting, huge one. Amazing to see you implement that today, and predictive maintenance, and also potentially efficiency analysis and improvement across not only the way the machine is behaving, but potentially the way that workforce and machine are interacting with each other as well. We could see that coming down the pipeline in processing technology pretty soon.
And I will say, going back to what I was saying earlier with, the automation technology becoming more and more accessible. We're a niche manufacturer. In the grand scheme of things, we make a machine which fills vape carts. It's a very niche industry. It's not like any mass market giant, hundreds and hundreds of $1 million a year type business. And we're implementing these things. They are accessible. And if I real quick shout out, we developed that internal VapeGPT system. It was so helpful. that I actually just ripped that code out and made a product of its own that anybody can install today to their own Slack workspace. It's called TautBot. It's the same thing we use internally. You can give it your own information. And the thing about that is it's just so accessible. You can just go and, if you email me directly, you don't even have to pay $30 a month. I'll just enable it for you. It doesn't matter. Like, these tools are so accessible. It's crazy. It's a great time to be alive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Ryan, for joining us on Plants to Plants, the cannabis processing talks. And they can find all of the Vape-Jet products and additional information at vape-jet.com. Any other call outs you'd like to do?
No, if anyone wants to talk directly, Ryan at vape-jet.com and at vape-jet on most social platforms. And if you're interested in the Slack bot I was talking about earlier, we made it available to everyone. It's tautbot.com.
Thanks again for coming on Plants to Plants. And everyone, you can find us at www.scifysystems.com. I'm Emmett McGregor, Sci-Fi Systems CEO, and your host for Plants to Plants Cannabis Processing Talks. Find us at Sci-Fi Systems on YouTube and on all your other social media. We look forward to a full year of 2024 of Plants to Plants with many other amazing guests, including an upcoming episode about hydrocarbon membranes, the HMS product with Zev Feinstein from Molecular Forces LLC. So stay posted to Sci-Fi Systems on YouTube. Please like and subscribe. That helps us with the algorithm. And find us at Sci-Fi Systems on all other social media platforms. Thank you once again, Ryan, for joining us. And everybody, go check out www.vape-jet.com.
Thank you again, Emmett. It was a pleasure.